Gus, Facebook page. With all due respect, I think your words further entitle many blacks to find excuse instead of getting to work and doing better. We all have our injustices to overcome. Sir, you're speaking of 200 years ago.
Let's objectify this for a second. Let me use UN human rights language. Let's say the criteria were not just race, but race, color, religion, gender, nationality, political opinion. You take any one of those and say, we're going to select out people from this category by gender or by religion or by nationality or by political opinion. And we're going to take all of those people that we can find and we're going to enslave them for 246 years and follow that with a legally enforced period of peonage in which you work for nothing, which is slavery by another name, and then follow that by legal segregation, and then take away their names, and then rename their group so that they are no longer Africans, but they become some strange, odd label Negroes. Whatever that is, or wherever that came from, they'll be known by that. And so they lose all their tradition, all of their mores, all of their yeses and nos about what to do and what not to do and how we do things from the dawn of time. And they don't know themselves anymore. It doesn't make any difference whether they're black or not. Take the caller. Take his profile. Do that to him.
At a time when drug crime was actually on the decline, not on the rise. The war was declared before, not after, crack hit the streets and ravaged poor communities of color across America. President Richard Nixon was the first to coin the term, a war on drugs, but it was President Ronald Reagan who turned that rhetorical war into a literal one. And at the time he declared that war, drug crime was actually on the decline, not on the rise. Now, why declare a drug war when drug crime's on the decline and less than 2% of the American population identifies drugs as its most pressing concern? Well, the answer is that from the outset, the drug war had very little to do with actual concern about drug abuse or drug crime, and nearly everything to do with racial politics. Numerous historians and political scientists have now documented that the war on drugs was part of a grand political strategy adopted by the Republican Party known as the Southern Strategy of using racially charged get tough appeals on issues of crime and welfare to appeal to poor and working class whites, particularly in the South, who were resentful of, anxious about, threatened by many of the gains of African Americans in the civil rights movement. Now, to be fair, we have to admit that poor and working class whites really had their world rocked by the civil rights movement. Wealthy whites could send their kids to private schools, could give their kids all the advantages that wealth has to offer. But poor and working class whites were faced with a social demotion. It was their kids who might be bused across town to a school they believed was inferior. It was their kids, not the wealthy white kids, their kids who were going to be suddenly forced to compete on equal terms for scarce jobs with this whole new group of people they've been taught their whole lives to believe were inferior to them. This fear and resentment, anxiety, created an enormous political opportunity. In fact, in the words of H.R. Haldeman, President Richard Nixon's former chief of staff, he described the strategy as, quote, "The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to," end quote. And so now here we are, decades later, and millions of people of color are cycling in and out of our criminal justice system, permanently locked up and locked out. But still, some folks say, well, this is a regrettable necessity. We've got to do something about those drug kingpins and those ghetto communities. But this drug war has never been focused on rooting out violent offenders or drug kingpins. Never. Federal funds have flowed to those state and local law enforcement agencies that boost dramatically the sheer numbers of drug arrests. It's a numbers game. They haven't been rewarded in cash for bringing down the drug kingpins or the most violent offenders. No, they've been rewarded in cash for the sheer numbers of people swept into this system. And the results are quite predictable. 2005, for example, it was reported that 4 out of 5 drug arrests were for simple possession, only 1 out of 5 were for sales. In 1990s, the Clinton years, the greatest escalation of the drug war, nearly 80% of the increase in drug arrests were for marijuana possession, a drug less harmful than alcohol or tobacco, and at least as prevalent in middle-class white communities and on college campuses as it is in the hood. But by waging this drug war almost exclusively in the hood, we've managed to rebirth a caste-like system in America. Now, I know time's running short, and I want to hear from the panelists as well, but I just want to identify a few of the most obvious parallels between mass incarceration and Jim Crow and say a few words about what we can do to end this system. The most obvious similarity, of course, is denial of the right to vote. 48 states and the District of Columbia deny prisoners the right to vote, but that's just the tip of the iceberg because, once you're released, you can be denied the right to vote for a period of years or the rest of your life. And here in the United States, we treat that as normal. People shrug their shoulders at that. But in other Western democracies, in other European democracies, prisoners have the right to vote, and there's voting drives in prison. But here in America, we take the idea of democracy a little less seriously. And in some states, you can be denied the right to vote for the rest of your life because you were once branded a felon. Exclusion from jury service. One hallmark of the old Jim Crow system were the all-white juries, particularly in the South, and the automatic exclusion of blacks from the juries. Well, today, if you're branded a felon, you're deemed ineligible for jury service for the rest of your life. And then if you've ever had a negative experience with law enforcement, you can be struck from a jury for cause. Good luck finding many folks in poor communities of color who have not yet had a negative experience with law enforcement that would justify their exclusion from a jury for cause. All white juries have been having a roaring comeback in many parts of the country that are quite diverse because of this system of mass incarceration, rendering so many outside of what we understand to be those who are full-fledged citizens.
So the right has made Chicago into a symbol that stands for unstoppable urban violence, the futility of gun laws, the wildness of black males, the incompetence of Obama, and the blindness of the left, which wastes time talking about race while most killings are intraracial. If only we would stop race baiting and clean up our own house. If only unwed black women would stop having babies and black men would pick up their sagging pants. If it sounds like a straw man argument, that's because it is. The right talks about Chicago so much, I assumed it was the most violent city in America. But there's this amazing new thing called Google. In 2012, Chicago had the largest number of murders, 506. But per capita, America's third biggest city is America's 21st most dangerous city. And over the past 20 years, Chicago has made incredible progress in steadily reducing their homicide rate. It's half what it was, and this year it's lowering to rates not seen since the 1960s. Nationally, over the past 3 decades, arrests of blacks for homicide and other violent crimes have fallen by about half, coinciding with a years-long nationwide historic drop in the murder rate. Quote, we're at as low a place as we've been in the past 100 years, says Randall, history professor and author of the book American Homicide. What's happened? I'll tell you, criminologists agree it has nothing to do with sagging pants. They cite many factors, including the waning of the crack epidemic and a rise in the number of police and smarter deployment of those cops, especially hotspot policing, because crime tends to be concentrated geographically. For example, 3% of New York City's real estate is where 20% of its worst crimes occur. But deploying cops in ways that leave communities feeling attacked and disrespected is counterproductive and potentially criminogenic. Many criminologists agree with David Kennedy when he says, quote, there is a direct link between the feeling that police are illegitimate and high levels of violence. People who feel worthless in society because they cannot find meaningful jobs or any jobs and have interactions with police that are filled with disrespect, those people are much more likely to look at the law as illegitimate. Those people just may be wearing their pants in an antisocial way because they feel rejected by society and see no value in following its rules. We don't value black boys in this society if they can't rhyme or play sports, and then we wonder why they reject a society that presumes them guilty and worthless. They can see the school-to-prison pipeline, and they know the odds of escaping it are high. They don't need fake tough love. They need real love and respect. The question isn't what black boys need to do to be more respectable for us. It's about what we can do to help them see more value in being a full part of American society. That does it for The Cycle. It's time for Martin Bashir.